I remember you had given the example of Japan in your book, and something that I never thought about as far as population goes, and having enough young people to take on jobs and keep working. And then from the perspective of somebody being elderly or retired, they, for let's say for me, if I'm retired and my investments depend on the US economy, well, I kind of depend on the US economy continuing to do what it does. And if there's maybe, not enough young people working, all of a sudden the US GDP starts to go down. And then all of a sudden my retirement doesn't look as rosy as what I thought it would be. And something that I had never thought about, and kind of concerning to me if that would happen. Do you find that you hear from people that maybe read your work saying that, oh my gosh, I'm a little fearful for the future, especially maybe in the Western world?
Well, excuse me, I do hope that people read my books, and end up not fearful, but realizing they need to get on with something, which is creating more pronatal societies, having children if they're of an age to, and encouraging others if they're not. I think there are a number of ways this aging and this what we call a decline in the old age dependency ratio. So, how many old people are there to the number of workers and how that goes down over time? That is a single problem that manifests itself in different ways. So, one way it will manifest itself is declining returns in the stock market as the economy shrinks or doesn't grow. Now, in the US, you invest a lot at home. You could say, well, we can invest in the countries where there is a buoyant population. The problem with that, of course, is that there are fewer and fewer such countries. And the more and more such countries are not investable. I mean, more and more of the countries with a high fertility rate are places which are not politically stable or yet economically growing. So if you think you can put all your retirement fund into a Congolese or Senegalese fund, I mean, those emerging markets have got a role to play, but they're not yet there yet. And if you're going to invest in Asia or Europe, you're not going to help yourself from a demographic point of view. The same problem occurs in the labour market when an old age home can't recruit people, or we haven't got enough doctors or nurses or anything. Every sector in the British economy, for example, is crying out for labour. We've got a sluggish economy, we've got mass immigration, and we've still got very little unemployment. Now, it's great that we've got little unemployment. When I was growing up in the 80s, unemployment was a huge problem, and I don't want that to come back. Um, but it's disturbing that we have this massive shortage of labour. And another way it expresses itself is the way that government finances work. Now, Japan, which has got this problem in spades, has got the highest debt to GDP ratio, about 250% in the whole developed world, is much higher than in the States or Britain. In America, because of the way you run your what you call social security, you can see when social security starts having to pay out more than it gets in. And you have to ask where that money is going to come from. And if it comes from general taxation, how high do taxes have to go? And ultimately, taxes will be so high that the incentives for young people to stay will be very low, but there won't be anywhere for them to go. So I think there will be eventually a revolt of the productive generations, if you like. And that will mean that a lot of old folk are neglected because there won't be anyone to look after them. There won't be any pensions. There won't be any carers. And the government simply won't have anywhere to go for the funds. So I am pessimistic in that respect, but I think we can turn it round. But we have to start talking about it. And it's rather late in the day, which is why I get a bit annoyed by people who just want to shut the debate down rather than engage in it.
Do you think where the challenges that you just mentioned, as far as working population, is this where something like artificial intelligence could step in and perhaps ease that burden?
I have a chapter in my forthcoming book. I say forthcoming, it's out on the 4th of July, which, of course, in America is a very special day. It's also a special day here because we've got an election, but we fixed the date before the election was called. I can't say we fixed the date before American independence, but anyway, 4th of July, the book's coming out. And I have a chapter called What Technology Can Do for Us. And my basic argument there is we always have technologies, or we have had for hundreds of years, that replace labour. We have the Luddites protesting against it in the 1810s. If you had said to someone in 1800 that by 1900 very little of the population of Britain will need to be in farming, they'd have said, well, we'll all be unemployed. What will we do? If you'd said in 1900, by 2000, very few will work in industry, you'd say, they'd have said, well, if they're not in agriculture and they're not in industry, that's it. We are always inventing new requirements for labour as fast as we are destroying them, the jobs by technology. The example I give in the book, 1900, I can't remember how many tens of thousands of horses there were in Britain. It was the main form of transport. And that meant forage, growing forage, trading in horses, breeding horses, selling horses, looking after them, stabling them, muses, driving them. That all went over a 20, 30-year period very rapidly. It didn't cause mass unemployment. Along came the motor car and mass employment in that. So now we have fewer people. Well, you're in Detroit, you know all about that. So technology is always coming along. So the question is it different this time? The personal computer, the internet was supposed to destroy jobs, and they haven't. They've created more jobs. And one of the things I do in the book is cite the LinkedIn entry of my son-in-law, one of my sons-in-law, who is in automated testing. And honestly, I don't understand what his LinkedIn posting means. And I don't need to. It doesn't matter. People of my age don't need to. Those who need to will understand it. My parents didn't really understand what I was doing in financial consulting. So new needs for labour are always being invented. Are we at this point where millions and millions of jobs are about to be destroyed? Well, I've reason to be sceptical. One reason is that in our developed countries, we have very service-oriented economies. We don't have that many jobs that can be easily and quickly replaced by robots. The people who pick up the bins, robots can't do that. Care in old age homes, fixing a dripping tap. So I'm not saying AI won't help some and get rid of some jobs and help in other jobs. But if we were about to see a transformation, we would now be seeing high productivity growth. I mean, the classic sign of this is high productivity. What is the GDP per hour worked? And the growth in that is really, really flat in our economies. Now, to put it very simply, if we were on the verge of a revolution, AI were coming along, we would be able to do what we can do today with half the people. So we'd have an unemployment problem, we'd have massive growth in productivity because half the people would be doing what the economy does. Or the same people would double the size of the economy, would have mass, or somewhere in between. But work, the value of an hour of work would be growing very rapidly. That's productivity. The productivity data says that our productivity growth is slower and slower each cohort, each decade. So maybe we're about to transform that, but actually productivity growth has been slowing. And for all the talk about the rise of the robots and the arrival of AI, most businesses are short of labour. Now, in an era where we're short of labour, that will put enormous pressure on the technologists to come up with solutions. It will mean more capital investment. But I am dubious that technology is going to sort out a problem whereby you go in Japan, say, if you go back to the 1960s when they reached 100 million people, there were about 8 or 9 workers for every retiree. When they get back down to 100 million in the 2040s or 2050s, there'll be barely 1 worker for 1 retiree. I don't believe technology is going to mean that's not a problem.